Bo and Luke Nation, welcome to this episode of the Bo and Luke Show. I am your co-host, Bo Brabo, and we have in studio Luke Kerrigan, our other dynamic rock star co-host. I always talk about all the guitars he has hanging on the wall. One day you will hear him play, I promise. Today we have a fantastic guest with us. We talk a lot on this show, Luke, about, our motto is be better, know better, do better. We talk about leadership, professional development. We talk about work-life harmony versus work-life balance. We're really going to get into that with our special guest, Mike Robbins. Mike's a best-selling author. He's a speaker. He's a renowned expert. He works in the leadership space with clients like Google, Department of Labor. He's worked with the San Francisco Giants, Wells Fargo. The list can go on and on with the types of companies that Mike has been engaged with. He's written multiple books. The one that intrigues me, Luke, for this particular podcast conversation, the title is Bring Your Whole Self to Work: How Vulnerability Unlocks Creativity, Connection, and Performance. And if you look this up, folks, on Amazon, right in the very first paragraph in the description of this book, what I really love is, what Mike explains is we can work better, lead better, and be more engaged and fulfilled if, instead of trying to hide who we are, we show up fully and authentically. Isn't that just fantastic, Luke?
Yes.
We talk about this all the time. I'm so glad to have Mike on the show. So, Mike, welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys. I, if you told the 7-year-old version of myself that I get to talk to Bo and Luke, I would be like over the moon. But
no way.
Well, you can still be over the moon. We'll accept.
I am. I'm excited to talk to you guys, and of course, the Dukes of Hazzard was my favorite show as a kid. So
yeah,
good.
It's nice.
Good. Well, yeah,
yeah. Go ahead, Luke.
I was pumped to have you on when I looked up your website and was looking at these 5 books that you have. There's 5, right? Are there more than 5? There's 5 on the website.
Just 5. Yeah.
Just 5. So it's only 5 so far.
Only 5 so far.
Even just looking at him, I was like, oh, this guy is going to be great to have on the show. Because I feel like just from reading the covers, it's what Bo and I like to talk a lot about, but we don't always articulate it in the perfect way. So I think you're just going to add such a value.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get started, it surprised me, Mike, when we started this podcast about 4 years ago, and we're looking at the Bo and Luke show, right? That there were no other Gen Xers that had pulled the name Bo and Luke from the popularity of just Bo and Luke Duke from the Dukes of Hazzard. I'm like, how has nobody snagged this, right?
Yeah.
So we were fortunate. I feel fortunate, anyways. So
for sure.
Why don't you kick us off? Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, and we'll go from there.
Well, let's see. What can I tell you? I've been writing books and speaking and working with teams and leaders and people for, 23 years now. But my journey to do this work is kind of a unique one. I grew up here in California, where I still live, but I played baseball all growing up as a kid. I actually got drafted out of high school by the New York Yankees.
Wow.
Didn't end up signing with the Yankees at that time because I got an opportunity to play baseball in college at Stanford. So I went to Stanford and then played baseball there. And then I got drafted out of Stanford by the Kansas City Royals. And I did sign a pro contract. And the way it works in baseball, you get drafted by a major league team. You got to go in the minor leagues, right? So I go into the minor leagues. I'm working my way up, trying to get to the big leagues as a pitcher. Unfortunately for me, my 3rd season still in the minors, I went out to pitch one night. I threw one pitch, tore ligaments in my elbow.
Oh.
Yeah, blew my arm out. I was 23 when I got hurt. I had started playing baseball when I was 7. 2 years, 3 surgeries. 2 years, 3 surgeries later, I was forced to retire. And I was devastated, as you can imagine.
Of course,
it's been the focus of my life. But one of the things that I had become, 2 things that I'd become really fascinated by, particularly by the time I got to college and was playing professionally. The first thing I noticed was it wasn't always the most talented people that were the most successful. And it wasn't always the most successful people that seemed the most fulfilled or the happiest. So I was like, that's interesting. We don't really learn much about that. But how do you take any talent you have, turn it into success? And if you have any success, how do you actually turn it into fulfillment, happiness, joy? So I was curious about that. Yeah. The other thing I was curious about was it didn't seem like it was always the most talented teams, like the best players, that necessarily made the best team. Talent mattered in sports, of course, but there was some other thing that we called chemistry that factored in. It was like the coach and the attitudes of my teammates, and did we get along, and did we root for each other, and all these intangible things. Anyway, I thought both of those things had something to do with sports. And then I get into the real world. I get my first real job. It's the late 90s. And I'm like trying to make my way as a adult in the world, not playing baseball. And I realize, oh, nope, those things seem pretty universal. And after working for a couple of tech companies in the 90s, I actually started my consulting business really with some questions about that. Like, how do we unlock our potential and turn it into success? And then how do we actually create some fulfillment? And then on a group and team level, what are those things that go into creating that kind of chemistry or culture that makes teams work? And that's really what I've been studying and writing about and speaking about and, working with all these companies on over the last couple decades. So that's kind of how my journey started and how it's continuing to unfold.
I think that's an amazing story.
It's an incredible story all the way from the beginning.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I didn't take the job with the Yankees, so I went to my fallback plan, which was going to Stanford.
Yeah, pretty good options, I will say.
Those are both great options.
Yeah,
I think it's intriguing that you had the foresight even then, as a young adult, to be observing those things and questioning those things. How come it's not the most talented that get promoted and do well, or the most successful aren't the happiest?
Yeah,
just to be seeing that in your, I would imagine it would have been your early 20s, somewhere around there, and then try to dive into that in your own way in a consulting firm.
Well, and part of it, Bo, to be honest, was I actually had some real struggles when I was in college. I come from a family where there's a lot of mental health issues. My dad suffered from bipolar disorder, so I was aware of that as a phenomenon, even though, back in the 80s and 90s, people weren't talking about it that much. There was there still is a lot of shame associated with that. But then when I got to college, I actually struggled myself and found myself really depressed. And it was like, wait a second, what the hell? Because here I was, my parents had split up. We didn't have a lot of money. There'd been some challenges growing up. But Luke, to your point, I'm this kid who got drafted by the Yankees. I'm going to Stanford. I had played the game, not just baseball, but the game of life relatively well up to that point. If you'd asked me at 20 years old, when I was a junior at Stanford, is there anywhere else on the planet you would rather be right now? And I'd say, no. Maybe pitching at Yankee Stadium, but no, I'm at this great school. It's got a great baseball program, and I was miserable. And so then that was the part where I was like, wait a minute. No one has taught me how to actually be happy. No one's taught me how to be fulfilled. I've learned some things about, you got to get good grades and you got to win the game and you got to, act this way so the girl likes you or whatever the heck it was. I learned how to act but I'd never really done much interest. I was young, right? But I hadn't. So that's what got me starting to think a little bit more, because I was like, wait a minute. Maybe some of the stuff I thought what this whole thing was about on the surface, it's not really about. And, fast forward to now I'm going to turn 50 in February. It's like, there's a lot of things I think in life, we're told one thing, go do that, and then you'll be happy. And then we do that, and then we're not happy. And we're like, what the heck? You know what I mean? So it's like, that's our job to figure that out. But I think sometimes we get sold a bill of goods. I don't think anyone's trying to mess with us, but I just think sometimes it gets lost in translation, or maybe the people who are telling us don't really know themselves. So it's just get the job, buy the house, meet the person, have the kids, do the thing, and then it'll all work out.
Yeah.
True. I love how you pointed out, that the successful people weren't always the happiest, and then it begs the question, what really is success? What's that measurement? Is it money? I can't believe obviously I think anyone listening would be like, well, that can't be the only measurement of success that we're ever going to have. Right.
Right.
And I do think it comes down to happiness, as you mentioned. Right.
It's true. I like the idea, as someone who grew up with no money, and then over the course of my life have been fortunate to have a little bit more money, I can definitely say from personal experience, I enjoy having money versus not having money. But I love, someone said to me years ago, money can't buy happiness, but it can buy fun. So if you have money, you can go do fun things that you can't do not that you can't have fun without money, but hey, let's go take a ski trip. Hey, let's go to, I don't know, let's go to the show. Let's go do the thing. But those things in and of themselves aren't going to make us happy.
No,
because they don't have I think it was, who was it? Ben Franklin said, there is no joy in life. It doesn't exist there. Joy exists within us. So it's we bring the joy. And it's funny, my wife and I will reflect on this sometimes too, where it's like we went through a period when our girls were really young. We have teenagers who are 17 and 15 now, but like during the recession and, we had pretty tough financial times like a lot of people did. But it's funny because we think about that and we look back and go, gosh, we were broke or it was really hard. But then when we reflect on it or we look at photos or we remember back, it's like, but remember, we actually were having a lot of fun and there was a level of enjoyment to life, even with the stressful circumstances. So, I think sometimes the idea is we get the job, we make the money, we build the business, we accomplish the thing, whatever the thing is. And sometimes, everyone listening can relate to something we thought, once I do that, once I accomplish that, then I will have finally arrived. And the sad reality is usually when that thing happens, even if it's really cool, the cool thing wears off. And then we're like, darn it, that wasn't the thing.
Yeah, that conditional happiness where you're like, oh, yeah, once I get that, I'll be happy.
Right.
It's so funny you mentioned that. Like I grew up Catholic, went to Catholic schools all the way through high school, right? So I remember I mean this the nicest way, listeners, but I remember at a young age, like looking at priests, right? And then not having there's that disconnect in my head where I'm like, well, everything in life is saying, Luke, go get more money, go get a family, you got to study and do this.
Yes.
All right. But the leaders and the ones teaching us about happiness,
right?
They don't have any money. They're never going to have a spouse. They're never going to have a family, yet they find happiness in what they're doing for something else. So I relate to what you were saying about looking around and going, whoa, wait a minute here. Like there's got to be more to this.
Totally. And it's also relative. I just had the good fortune. I just got back a couple of days ago. I was in India for 9 days. One of our clients, a startup, they have a big office in Bangalore and they invited me out there and I went out and did a few events for them and a few other events for some, and it's my second time to India and it's such an amazing, beautiful country, but it's so different obviously than the US. There's 1.4 billion people in India and India's about a fourth the size of the United States. So there's just people everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And what was amazing to me is I'm like soaking in the food and the culture and the people and asking a lot of questions and just being sort of overwhelmed by all the sensory overload of like, this is so different than home. But there's something really beautiful about that part of the world too, where there's such a focus on family and connection and spirituality that's just palpable. And again, it's been very much influenced by the West, and a city like Bangalore is sort of the tech hub. So it does have some feels of, it's kind of India's Silicon Valley, if you will. But I just found myself in a lot of really interesting conversations with people over there that I appreciated. But again, talking about what are we really after in life? And I love when I get a chance to travel somewhere really far away because it takes me completely out of my normal day-to-day context. And I realize, gosh, there's literally billions of people all over the planet who are living very different lives and in very different ways than I am. And the good news about that, I think, is that there's not just one way to be happy or one way to be successful. There's so many different ways, right? We get to choose.
Yeah, I think, for everybody listening, if you've never had a chance to travel overseas to other countries and just see how people live, by all means, do your best to save your money and take a trip and go experience that. I even found something similar. And I would have never expected it when I lived in Germany, Mike. And it was that's very westernized, very modernized country. They have all the same stuff that we have. They love the fast cars and the nice cars and the Autobahn. Right. It's amazing, right?
Yeah.
But some of the traditions that have been there for ages are still there. Things close, retail shops close at 7 p.m. right? And they're not open on Sundays. And what I thought was the best, all the farms had their trails that go through the farms. And if you lived in the village, right, the farmers had no problem with people walking the trails, like as if it was a park, right? Even though it's private property. Wow. People with their kids, their dogs, they're on their bikes. But then what does everybody respects the property? They're not damaging the farmland. They're not trying to pick crops so the farmer can't sell their crops. They're just out there with their family time, big family culture. And I'm like, ooh, that's not like that in the U.S. Well, and farmer puts up a fence to keep you off of his property.
Right. And but what's interesting about that, and I love that you're bringing it up too, because I do think I've been thinking about this a lot. I've actually just the last couple of podcast episodes that I've recorded, I've been talking a lot about this, like multiple things being true at the same time, thinking differently. And I do feel like it's so important for us, although challenging and uncomfortable, right? To like step out of our norm, whatever it is. And look at that. You don't have to travel to Germany or India to do that. I mean,
Right.
you can drive to the next town over. You can change the channel on TV. You can look at some different feeds on social media or what, just to like, wait a minute. Not everybody thinks the way that I think. Not everybody does what I do. And that's a really beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's like I work with a lot of teams, and I'm constantly talking about diversity with teams for the standpoint of, and it may be diversity, like people look different and they come from different backgrounds, and that's cool, but it's literally like you want a diverse set of humans, a diverse set of skills on a team. Because if we're all the same and we all have the same skills and we all think the same way, we're not going to be a very good team. You want people that disagree with you, that push up against you, that, you know, like in every organization, it's like, hey, the person who's in charge of the product is going to see it differently than the person who's in charge of selling the product versus the person who's in charge of marketing the product versus the person who's in charge of counting the money and making sure, like, all of those people have different skill sets, but they also have different mindsets.
Yeah.
And they're going to see it differently. That's a good thing, because that's going to make whatever we're creating together better.
100%. I was just thinking about that. My gosh, sad story, but a person that I worked with that worked for me during my Army days passed away unexpectedly a couple weeks ago.
Sorry to hear that.
But he was one of the people, and he was a subordinate of mine,
Mm-hmm.
but he would always push me. Right. He didn't always agree with what I was doing, but he had the ability to articulate why he disagreed, how he saw things. And in retrospect, I know wholeheartedly that made me better. That made me a better leader. It gave me different perspective and better perspective. If nothing else, for me to learn how to communicate, if I wasn't communicating in the right way, what I needed done or what we needed to do or why we needed to do it, and the team wasn't understanding well enough, then it made me look at, like, how am I communicating? Am I giving them a full understanding? Am I giving them the full picture, the team, right? Yeah. And I'll be honest, I only had one other person ever that I felt did that. And
that's huge.
That's huge. Yeah.
Well, and such an important leadership quality. I mean, look, if people are constantly pushing back, it can sometimes be unproductive, clearly.
Right.
But there's a lot of times, if you have enough confidence and you have the ability to make it safe enough for people, even as a subordinate, someone who, you know, in the business world sort of reports to you, but in the military world is, you know, you're their commanding officer, whatever the language is. If someone actually feels safe enough that they can challenge you and let you know that they disagree respectfully, it's always going to make us stronger and better, both as an individual, as a leader, but also as a team, where you have an environment where people feel safe enough that, you know, I'm often saying when I work with teams inside of businesses, it's like you want people to disagree in a productive way. You want to make sure you're hearing what people actually think. Because if everyone's saying yes, yes, yes all the time, like, you're not actually getting the best of everybody. Right. And people can't bring their whole selves. They can't bring all of themselves to the conversation or to the team or to the work, because they're like, well, you know, his ego is a little sensitive. We can't ever tell him we don't like that, or we don't agree, or there's a better way to do it.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that you help leaders do? Are there tips? Are there practices they can do? Like, if they don't have that kind of team, they don't have that environment, or it's someone you come in contact with, you're about to engage, and they say, hey, Mike, I have a yes room. Everybody just says yes.
Right. Well,
how do you guide them?
It's some of it's, you know, it's kind of a symbiotic relationship between the leader and the team. Now, again, even the best leaders, you can't control people. You can't force people to do things. You can influence them. You can inspire them. And so much of my work focuses on authenticity and how do you create that sense of authenticity within a team. You know, there's trust, which is more of a one-to-one phenomenon. Like, you and I can trust each other, you know, Bo, you and I could trust each other. Luke, you and I could not trust each other, or vice versa. For whatever reason, trust can get violated, but that's more of a one-to-one. Group trust is what we call psychological safety, meaning the team is safe enough for what? Taking risks, speaking up, challenging each other, Bo, as you were talking about, making mistakes, even failing. Not that we want to, but we know on a team with psychological safety, you know, you can make a mistake and even fail. You're not going to get shamed. You're not going to get ridiculed. You're not going to get kicked out of the group. Now, you might get held accountable. There might be some consequence to our behaviors or the outcomes, but psychological safety is super important. And the key driver in psychological safety, has a lot to do with the courage and the vulnerability of the leader.
Hmm.
So what I work with a lot of leaders on is, how can you, the metaphor that I use is a bit of an overused one, but it's how can you lower the waterline on your iceberg a bit and actually allow yourself to be more real and more human and more vulnerable with the people around you. Now, that doesn't mean you're not aware of the fact that you are in a position of authority.
Mhm.
It's not about being inappropriate. But it is about, a lot of times simple things that leaders can do. It's like, ask for help when you need help. Admit when you made a mistake, be willing to change course and change your opinion, take feedback and go, you know what? That's a better way to do it. Let's do that.
Yeah.
Those type of things, as simple as those things sound, like they go a long way. And they're hard to do, though, because we're either trained directly or indirectly. Don't do that. Don't admit when you made a mistake. Don't ask for help. It'll look weak. Don't change course because people won't think you know what you're, all the things that we get caught up in. And, it can be tricky, whether it's the military or it's the business world or we're in education I've worked in so many different environments. Some of the cultural norms may differ, but there's usually a set of expectations that people kind of walk into, some of which kind of like, hey, just, buy the house and you'll be happy, are problematic because they don't actually work.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Amazing.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. I love digging into more of just the authenticity as well. I think it's something like, Mike, how do we get to this position in 2023, almost 2024, where people are just not like, it's okay to not be authentic? And it started with, I'm going to rant here for a second, just a heads up, guys. But so I feel like it started with just email campaigns, spam email, not even spam email, but like, hey, let's insert this person's first name and let's blast this out to 3,000-4,000 people. And that's going to be our business strategy. Then people started cold calling with that.
Yes.
Then people started showing up to work and doing this, like just the quantity over quality. Here we go. And now I feel like it's bled over into our personal lives. And even folks at work, we're not authentic. And it's more repulsive than anything else in the business world right now. If like someone can smell you or see you just not being authentic, it's an immediate turnoff. And the worst part is they're not going to tell you to your face. Like no one's going to be like, hey, you're not authentic and I'm not going to do business with you because of that. They're just going to let it go. And people are just going to keep failing.
Yeah.
But what, and I try to coach a whole bunch of people in sales. I've been doing it for years. Right.
Yeah.
And like the number one piece of advice I give them is I'm like, you have, like baseball, you have to find your swing. It's got to be authentic. You could say the exact same thing as me. And if it's not authentic, it's not going to work.
Right.
Like, good. Yeah. I guess I don't have a question in there, but let's wrap on that for a minute.
Well, I mean, look, I actually think, look, you're speaking to something really important. And the way I see it is there's a bit of a paradox here. On the one hand, if you think of today, right, end of 23 going into 24, like the world in which we live right now. I mean, even just us having this conversation in this format on this podcast, I would argue this is a more open and real and authentic conversation than a lot of us were having publicly, say 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, before maybe, I was even born. So the good news is collectively, I think, both at work and just in life, there's an openness and a realness to kind of how we operate, how we communicate. I mean, look, it's one of the reasons why people like listening to podcasts, and podcasting has become such a big thing because we have these long form conversations. We're talking about real stuff. People are more casual. People swear. People tell stories of their life and trauma, all kinds of stuff, right? Whereas, again, 20 years ago, if you guys were interviewing me on the radio or on TV, it would be very buttoned up and be very short. Yeah. Okay, so Mike, so give us the 3 points you got on the right? Not that that's inherently bad. Those things still exist. Same thing is true at work. If, again, 30, 40 years ago, you and I, the three of us as three guys are going to work wearing suits and ties. We're showing up at the office with our briefcase and that kind of thing. It's not that it doesn't exist at all, but that's not really the way people work anymore, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. People are working from home. We're working in jeans and flip-flops or whatever. There's a bunch of casuality, if you will. And there's an understanding that we're going to show up to work. Even the fact that I could write a book called Bring Your Whole Self to Work that came out a few years ago, trying to write that book 30 years ago would have been like, what are you talking about? That's like a foreign language. That said, Luke, to what you're speaking to, though, there is also a way in which we've become more sophisticatedly full of what, if you will, because like now we have the tech. I mean, and now we're going to embrace AI, and there's going to be all these things that are like, hey, I can make basically a facsimile of myself, a representation of myself that can go out in the world and say stuff and sell stuff and make money. And, that's the email campaign. That's the, the overly doctored post on social media that's trying to present an image that's not actually real. And so I think today it's more incumbent upon us to really pay attention to that. And as I talk to a lot of people, and look, there's genuine fear about artificial intelligence and excitement, but I don't know what it's all going to bring. But I keep saying to myself and everyone I'm talking to, like, if we just keep showing up for real, nothing's going to be able to recreate an authentic human being.
Yeah.
Right. You just, all of the research and data in the world, all of the editing and cultivating we want to possibly do, all of the artificial intelligence enhancement to anything that we write or create. It's like, at the end of the day, there's still nothing that can replace like a human story and a human experience.
Right.
So I think there's a struggle though, Luke, because the world also moves really fast, and the expectation for us to communicate in a bold way, in a broad way, to scale our businesses, to get things out there, to present ourselves well, to respond to all the 9 gazillion messages we're getting all the time. Like we're just, I don't know that we were designed to navigate so much. And I'm not saying this in some kind of, whiny victim-y way, but I do think most people are doing the best that they can. And quite frankly, from my research and my own personal experience, being authentic, like really being authentic, takes quite a bit of courage and intention and can be hard.
It is hard.
It
is hard.
Because if I'm a fake version of myself and you don't like me or you reject me, it's actually easier to deal with than if I'm genuinely myself and you're like, yeah, not so much, man.
That's a really good point. That's a super good point.
And with businesses scaling, do you think, and I don't know if this is a trend or just something that I'm seeing, but I feel like we're the line between scaling technology or equipment is blurring its way into people. And now we're trying to like, because if you ask me, I guess I'm kind of old school on this, although I don't feel that old. I'm not that old. But like, if you ask me, I'm like, the only way to scale people is to teach critical thinking and problem solving. They got to be able to think critically for themselves. And if everyone can do that, we'll scale.
Yeah.
But now I see businesses going the other way and they're like, no, we're only going to make decisions that are scalable. And there's still one part of me where I'm like, wait, but that's not going to work. Like they're not computers.
I mean, look, I tend to agree with you. I do also think we were talking about this as you were just mentioning about the name of your show. I also think some of this may be a function of us being Gen Xers. Yeah. And the reason that I say that, because look, and we're sort of my wife and I talk about this all the time. We're the forgotten generation. Nobody talks about Generation X.
No.
And even people listening right now, unless you're a Gen Xer, you don't even really know when Gen X starts and ends or what it means, or everyone just goes from boomers to millennials. And now we're talking about Gen Zers. And it's like, there's a whole bunch of us that were born between, I don't know, like 65 and 78, thereabouts, or 65 and 80, and the thing is that we're not the digital natives, right? We grew up in more of an analog world. Now we were the generation of the sort of .com boom and bust. But there's so many ways in which like boomers sort of ran the world, and some of them still do in a lot of ways, that didn't really want to relinquish that power to our generation. But then the millennial generation is so big, and they were digital natives and kind of understand some of these things intuitively about technology that those of us who are just a few years older don't. And sometimes I just think it's a struggle. Luke, to your question, it's like, wait a second. I get all of this and this scalability and the importance of embracing technology and everything, but there's still a part of me in my formative years, I didn't have any of that, and I was okay. And I think we're missing something and losing something if we give all of that up. And I think both of those things are true.
Yeah, you're right. It's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah. And I think there's a risk without people like you, Mike, in the leadership space, leadership development space, and working with teams across the globe, obviously, podcasts like this where we want to talk about it. There's potential that we risk losing what we have, or what we're trying to help and build in folks and their leadership abilities and what that all means. And if it all gets turned over to AI, to drive decisions down the road, or machine learning, like this is going to drive the decisions, this is what we're going to do, and we're not actually talking to people,
Right.
And you come to the next generation, maybe it's after Gen Z, and they don't even know what we would even be talking about. Like, what are you guys talking
Right.
about? I don't even know what that is.
Well, and look, if we think about it that way, I mean, look, I tend to be an optimist when it comes to these things, even though I have my fears and doubts and concerns.
Yeah.
I do feel like at the end of the day, there's enough smart, capable, aware, conscious, compassionate humans who do care. And, you know, like with anything, I was at a conference, an AI conference in San Francisco a few months ago, and they were just basically talking about even some of the people creating some of this technology, like, we don't really know where this is all going, and we're in the we're in the infancy. Some guy, one of the guys who's one of the founders of ChatGPT, was out there basically saying this is like 1990 of the internet is where we are with AI right now.
Crazy.
And when he said that, he was like, but what we have to do collectively is like really pay attention, because as the internet did and has done and has changed the world and how we operate, artificial intelligence is going to be another wave of that. But again, not pretending to understand this any more than I do, which is very little. I do think it's about having conversations like this. I do think it's about staying conscious and staying present, that at the end of the day, all the technology in the world, I mean, this is some of the work that I do when I sit in a room with a group of leaders, whether it's 10 people around a table or it's a couple hundred people at a larger conference. It's like, I'll say some version of like, okay, look around the room, look at each other, make eye contact with another human in this room. Like, there's no technology on the planet that can recreate that.
It's true.
Even
That's
though
true. Yeah.
even though we're all sitting in different locations at the moment right now, and I can see you on the screen, and people are either listening to this, or if they have access to seeing the video of this, they can. It's like, that's beautiful that we have that, right? I would joke during the pandemic, like, thank God this wasn't happened 30 years ago. We'd be faxing each other, you know. But like, we have the technology. It's beautiful, it's wonderful, but it can't recreate if we were all sitting in a room and we shook hands or we hugged when it was over and we looked each other in the eye. Like, there's something about that. And I think we have to just keep coming back to human connection is so important, and there's nothing that can recreate it.
Yep. I
So
completely
true.
agree. Luke and I experience that when we do our podcasting live at conferences.
Yeah.
Right. So you're interviewing guests in person.
Totally
And
different,
even
right?
that, it is. It really it's almost like a phenomenon, right?
Yeah.
When you can have that in-person connection, see
Mhm.
all of the points of communication and the body language and everything else to drive help drive the conversation. It really is a different experience for sure.
Totally.
Well, and the technology helps bring that together too. And I love the pieces of technology that do. I mean, Zoom and Teams is amazing. I was over the past few years in sales, like I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, how in the world did I actually close business only using a telephone? I had no screen share. I couldn't see the person. They could be 7 feet tall for all I know. They have no idea who I was. And we actually closed business and actually made relationships on the phone. And now it just seems like, I'm like, how in the world because if you took Zoom away from me now, I'd be severely handicapped in what I could do.
Totally. It's funny you say that, because I agree with you, Luke. And there's so much business that gets done now over Zoom or Teams. I mean, I do presentations. I'm speaking, and I have an event tomorrow where I'm going to talk to 50 people, and I'm going to be sitting here in my office doing it, like this.
Yeah.
However, I will say, I feel like the art of talking on the telephone is something I still really enjoy. And sometimes, if it's not like I have to close a deal or I'm meeting someone newly, I will say, both business and then even personal, can we do this on the phone? And then I will go for a walk and talk on the phone. And I actually enjoy it. It feels, I'm like, we're talking on the phone. I know it's going to feel like 1987, but like, is that okay? And so I think we can then just choose. It's like, is email appropriate for this? Is phone? Is Zoom? Is Slack? Is text? And again, with all these different options that we have, being more mindful about how we communicate, and even asking people on our teams or who we do business with if they have a preference. And then we have the menu of options, because sometimes I find when I say to someone, can we do this on the phone? Or I'm going to be in my car, I can talk to you. They'll actually say, oh, it's so great. Like, I'm going to go for a walk too, or something. And then we end up having that meeting that way, which it's like, and even in the office, like even before COVID, but since, some managers I work with will say they'll have walking meetings with people on their team, and they find that the conversation changes. They can get to different things. They're outside, they're moving, again, so just thinking differently about how we communicate, I think, is a really important thing. It doesn't have to just be one way.
Mike, I'm going to
Yeah.
steal that. I'm going to start offering that for my meetings. I'm going to be like Zoom, or I'd be like, hey, how about this as an option? How about we both take a walk and we go do this on the phone? I bet the
Totally.
folks I talk to at different companies would be like, man, that is wild. We're going to include nature on this business meeting now. What?
Right. I mean, because unless you have to share screens, or sometimes like I want to take notes and just be, but there are times for me, I actually was a late adopter to the video thing. I mean, I wasn't a big Zoom, Skype person, because I also often would feel like, oh, I have to sit in front of my computer and stare at the screen. And it was awkward. I mean, I've gotten, like all of us, I've gotten so much more used to it over the last years because I had to. But I do think sometimes, again, just using that as an example, I think we get caught. I say this to leaders all the time. It's like, there's not just one right way to do it. It's got to be customizable to the people that you're working with so that you can have some flexibility, but also, look, it's like if you have multiple kids, you don't end up interacting with your kids exactly the same way because they have different needs and personalities and they need different things. One of them needs you to leave them alone more. The other one needs you to be more involved. And you have to figure that out. That's true with employees. That's true with teammates. That's true with friends and family. It's like, we're always going to be ourselves wherever we are, but we also can adjust depending on who we're talking to and what we're talking about.
Yes,
absolutely. Man, this is good. Mike, you need to be like a repeat guest.
Hey, anytime
on the Bo and Luke show.
I'll come.
We need to reserve Mike for like zinger questions that Bo and I don't know the answer to. And what we're going to do is just like, we'll be like, Mike, give us 5 minutes. We're going to ask you this question and then we're going to bounce off and then put it on LinkedIn.
That sounds good. I'm game. I'm not very short-winded though, so as you probably noticed, I'm not great with sound bites. But you can ask me anything you want.
That's perfect.
No, yeah, that's perfect. Excellent. Yeah. Well, before we let you go, Mike, we always give our guests an opportunity to give a shout out, plug whatever you want to plug. If there's someone you want to say happy birthday to, by all means, go for it. The floor is yours.
Jeez. There's nobody I can pay. I mean, our older daughter Samantha turns 18, but it's not for a few months. So, but I know she's very excited about that.
Milestone.
But I mean, nothing specific to promote. But if people are interested in me and my work and learning more about it, they can just check out my website, which is mike-robbins.com.
Yeah, speaking of your website, mike-robbins.com, when we're talking about AI, I will let you know. Like, I hope leaders today are using AI tools for productivity. When you talk about performance, right? So like with ChatGPT today, and I love learning new things and where this is all going with AI. ChatGPT 4, I just gave it a simple prompt. Like, I want you to go check out mike-robbins.com. I want you to analyze and review the website. Then I want you to give me an overview of the website and give me 18 questions that I could possibly ask Mike when I interview him on the podcast. And in like 10 seconds, I have a whole printout. And it's spot on. Like, I'm not asking it to solve world problems, or I don't have to worry about the accuracy of it.
Yes.
But for things like that, it feels a little bit like having an assistant, like a real assistant to do work for you.
Yeah.
And you can go to other things and other tasks. So
anyway. No, that's a very cool utilization of it.
Yeah. And I have one question for you that has nothing to do with leadership. It's going to go back to baseball. So we started with your baseball story.
Yep.
So I have a baseball question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever learn in that sport when you were drafted and you went to the minor leagues, why did Major League Baseball even set up the minor leagues from a professional sport perspective, wherein you don't see that in basketball, you don't see that in football. I don't think hockey has it. Why does baseball do that?
That's a good question. I mean, the other sports, there is the G League or whatever they call it in basketball, and then hockey. But yeah, there's nothing like the baseball minor leagues. I don't know that anyone ever told me this specifically, but what I do know about baseball is it's really hard. There's a lot of failure, and it takes a while to develop to get to the point where you can actually play successfully in the major leagues. Even coming out of college, Stanford, we had one of the top programs in the country. I mean, I pitched in the College World Series, and I was pretty good. I wasn't ready to pitch in the big leagues the day I got drafted by the Royals, even though I had just pitched in the College World Series. Like, wow, I was going to need a little bit of time just to get used to playing professional baseball. So there's a developmental process that goes into it. I mean, even Alex Rodriguez was my teammate on Team USA when I was in high school. He was a year behind me. We were roommates and teammates. He was the first pick in the draft the following year in 1993, and he spent a year or so in the minor leagues before he got to the big leagues. But he was a teenager when he got there, and those are few and far between. That's the Ken Griffey Juniors and Alex Rodriguez's and Mike Trouts of the world that get there at 19 years old. The vast majority of Major League Baseball players get to the big leagues when they're like 25. Even if they sign out of high school, they'll spend 6-7 years in the minor leagues before they get to the big leagues. And the college guys spend a couple years before they get there. So, wow, it's such an intricate game and different than football and basketball. I don't know that much about hockey, but like if you're LeBron James in high school and you're that good, now he wasn't a superstar in the NBA right when he got there, but he got to the NBA as an 18-year-old kid right out of high school and could compete against those guys. That's almost impossible to do in baseball. Maybe a pitcher, just because of the sheer arm strength. If you had a 18-year-old kid who threw 100 miles an hour and you threw him out on a major league mound, he might be able to get a couple guys out, but most likely not. He's going to need a few years to understand the game at that level to be able to play at the major league level.
That's incredible. I would have never thought about that without asking the developmental process in between, even in between college and actually making it.
Well, and the big difference, college baseball, they still use aluminum bats. And so the game with the wooden bat is literally like a different game, both on the hitting side and on the pitching side versus the aluminum bat. So that in and of itself took me about a full season to sort of learn how to pitch against wood bats versus aluminum bats.
Amazing.
Wow.
So
now,
thank you.
I did one time Google. I was like, why don't they allow aluminum bats in the major league? And I got one response on Reddit, and it said because people would die.
Oh yeah, those aluminum bats are pretty lethal even at the college level. But at the major league level, if like you put Jose Canseco back in the day with an aluminum bat, he might have hit a ball 700 feet and killed somebody. So
that was great. I was like, that's a perfect explanation.
I mean, the only reason they use them in college is because it saves money. You break so many wood bats that they were just rolling through them. And then sometime in the late 70s, early 80s, they started mass producing aluminum bats, and it was a lot cheaper because they don't break.
Wow. I think that was one of the worst things I ever saw was at a Washington Nationals game, maybe 5 years ago, before COVID. And first baseline, my wife and I were maybe like row 20 up from the field, and then about halfway down, maybe row 10. There was a line drive foul ball, man. It hit this 10 or 12-year-old kid like right in the cheek.
Yeah,
and that's like a sound you can't get out of your head.
No, that's
and
awful.
There was Luke. It was crazy. It was like a pause, like everybody knew it happened. Then there's like this pause that was probably not as long as it seemed.
Yeah,
and then all of a sudden there's blood and screaming, but it was like silence for just a second. It was the worst. I couldn't imagine. So if it was coming off of an aluminum bat. And
it's amazing that didn't happen more. I mean, now all the ballparks in the big leagues have screens the entirety of the lower deck, so that happens a lot less. But back in the day, like at Candlestick Park in San Francisco when I was growing up, and I was an A's fan, so I was in Oakland more often, they literally had just this little chain link fence behind home plate that was tiny. And I'm not sure how more people didn't get hurt and really injured. But even on the field, like it's amazing more guys don't get hit in the dugout when you're not paying attention or on the field. I mean, it happens from time to time. But yeah, baseball there's a lot of waiting and slowness in the game. But when something happens, it happens pretty fast and you got to be on your toes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we can do a whole other episode on baseball. So just bring me back.
We can.
There we go. Well, good. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for being on the show. We really appreciate it. Luke, any parting thoughts?
Mike, just thanks so much. We're going to have you back on. We have to have you back on. I feel like we just scratched the surface. But, man, happy holidays to you and the family. It's great having you on.
You as well. Thanks for having me, man. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Bone Luke Nation, you have been listening to Mike Robbins. Go check out mike-robbins.com. Be sure you check out the books that he has for sale. That's a wrap.